1876 Moscow. The winter air is heavy, thick with the silence that follows a nation's sin. Inside the dim corridors of the royal estate, a single candle flickers beside a throne draped in mourning cloth. The queen sits alone, her face pale, her eyes lost between guilt and defiance. Her name, Ekaterina Vasilyevna, once echoed through grand halls with power and fear. Now it trembles and whispers. Tonight she has summoned her council, not to command, but to confess. Her reign, once gilded in victory, has become a shadow soaked in blood. Whispers claim she walks the palace halls at night barefoot, speaking to portraits of the dead. Servants vanish, walls bleed condensation that smells of iron, and the bells of St. Arvid Cathedral toll without wind. Something inside the empire has broken, and at its center stands a queen who no longer wants her crown. The story of Ekaterina is not one of conquest or glory. It is the story of a monarch who watched her power turn into poison. Her advisors, men of influence and ambition, carved empires through murder and deceit. Every victory came at a price, the lives of the innocent, the blood of the forgotten. And though she sat on the throne, her conscience became the executioner. Rumors spread across Moscow. The queen dreams of her own death. She writes notes in the dark, signs decrees that order her own capture, and burns letters from those begging her to flee. One evening, she invites the royal guards and her council to witness her final judgment. They think it a test of loyalty. It is not. She reads aloud the charges: treason, corruption, bloodshed, and names herself guilty of them all. Gasps fill the hall. Torches sway in the cold wind that seeps through cracked glass. The guards hesitate, unsure if it's madness or divine punishment. The queen's voice does not tremble. "I have ruled a cursed kingdom," she says, "and I have become its curse." The council demands she retract her confession. Instead, she signs a royal decree ordering her own execution at dawn. The ink glistens under candlelight like fresh blood. Every witness feels the room grow colder, as if death itself had entered to take notes. That night, the queen walks through the empty corridors, touching the portraits of her ancestors. Some say she spoke to them. Some say they answered. She removes her jewels, leaves her crown on the table, and writes one final line in her diary: "I die so my people may sleep." As dawn approaches, the soldiers wait for her command to stop the madness, but she gives none. The queen steps outside into the frost, her breath merging with fog. The city below sleeps unaware. A bell rings once, echoing through the palace like a final heartbeat. No one moves. And then, without trembling, she kneels before her own decree. The dawn of February 13th paints the Moscow skyline in ash and silver. Snow gathers on the palace gates like funeral cloth. Inside, the queen's private guard stands frozen, unsure whether they protect a ruler or witness a prophecy. The royal courtyard, once filled with music and laughter, lies silent except for the slow creak of the gallows being raised. Ekaterina walks forward, her steps soft but unshaken, her expression calm as if this moment had been rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind. The wind claws at her cloak, scattering pages from the decree that sealed her fate. Each page carries her name written in her own hand, each word a confession carved in ink. She does not flinch. Around her, the whispers grow louder. Guards murmur prayers. Nobles hide behind their coats. The crowd outside presses against iron gates, drawn by something between horror and fascination. A queen ordering her own death is not rebellion. It is revelation. A priest stands beside her, trembling as he opens the holy text. His voice cracks as he speaks the rites of forgiveness. But she stops him. "No prayers," she says quietly. "The gods have watched enough." Her tone carries no hatred, no fear, only finality. Behind her eyes flickers every crime she allowed, every execution she ordered, every cry that echoed through the walls while she stayed silent. Her rule had been built on loyalty bought with fear, and now that fear had come to claim its debt. The executioner approaches, face hidden behind black cloth. She turns to him and whispers something no one hears. "Later he will tell investigators," she said. "Let it be quick, and may your hands not shake." He will also claim her eyes were not of a dying queen, but of a judge passing sentence. When the order is given, the sound that follows is not a scream. It is the wind cutting through silence. The city bell rings once, echoing across the frozen river, through every alley where her soldiers once marched. In that moment, Moscow seems to pause. The snow falls slower. The torches burn dimmer. The queen's body falls forward, her crown slipping into the frost. But even as she dies, witnesses swear her expression remains calm. Her lips curved faintly upward, as if she found peace in the punishment she chose. For years, that morning would be retold in hushed voices, the morning the queen executed herself. Some would call it madness, others a confession, but none could deny the feeling that lingered in the air long after her death, a heaviness that refused to leave the palace walls. The servants refused to clean the courtyard for weeks, fearing her spirit walked there. The priest who denied her prayer fell ill 3 days later, whispering her name before collapsing. The executioner vanished without trace, and the royal decree she signed in blood ordering her own end was never found again. Only a blank page remained, the ink evaporated as though history itself refused to record the sin. Before the frost claimed her name, Ekaterina Vasilyevna had been a symbol of beauty and wisdom. Born in 1838 to a noble family in Moscow's northern district, she was educated among poets, priests, and generals. Her childhood was steeped in tradition, discipline, devotion, and silence. By 17, she spoke 5 languages and had already learned the art of rule from her father, Duke Mikhail, a man known for his ruthless control over land and people alike. She married young to Prince Victor, heir to a wealthy but decaying dynasty. Their union was political, forged in desperation to unite 2 fading powers. For a time, they appeared untouchable, a royal couple who revived the empire's strength through fear and spectacle. Behind palace walls, however, their love was an illusion. Rumors spread of betrayal, secret chambers, and whispered names of the condemned. Every banquet hid a scandal, every toast concealed a lie. As famine swept through villages in the early 1870s, the royal treasury remained full. It was said the queen bathed in imported milk while peasants starved beneath her rule. Yet those who met her privately described her differently. Servants spoke of nights when she stood by the window for hours, staring at the city lights, her hands trembling. She funded orphanages in secret, paid debts of soldiers' widows without public record. Some believed she carried guilt long before her final confession. Her husband's death in 1874 deepened that darkness. Officially, he died of illness. Unofficially, rumors whispered he was poisoned. The court hushed the matter quickly, and the queen never spoke of it again. After his funeral, her transformation began. She stopped attending galas. She dismissed her personal guards and walked the palace halls barefoot, muttering prayers in Latin. One servant reported seeing her writing letters addressed to God, sealed in black wax, then burned before dawn. The royal council grew uneasy. They blamed her grief, but in truth they feared her mind had begun to slip. Her speeches grew strange. She spoke not of glory, but of ghosts. She claimed the empire was haunted by its own hunger, that the soil beneath Moscow was poisoned with regret. When an advisor mocked her words, he was found dead a week later, face pale, lips blackened as if touched by frost. Panic spread quietly. Some said the queen had cursed him. Others believed the curse was already within the palace. Records from that winter note servants quitting overnight, horses refusing to enter the courtyard, and mirrors shattering for no reason. The people began to call her the tragic queen, a ruler loved and feared in equal measure. In portraits from that period, her eyes seemed distant, as if seeing something no one else could. Her final painting, commissioned months before her death, shows her without crown or jewelry standing beside an open window. Snow falls behind her, yet her face remains untouched by cold. Historians later called it a prophecy in color, a woman preparing to step into eternity. As the final years of her reign unfolded, Queen Ekaterina's grip on both her empire and her sanity began to waver. The once vibrant halls of the Kremlin turned into corridors of echoes, their gold-trimmed mirrors draped in black velvet. Her advisors avoided her gaze, whispering that the queen had begun hearing voices, pleas of those executed under her rule. The empire's documents show increasing reports of disappearances. Prisoners scheduled for exile simply vanished. Guards swore they never opened the cells. Entire ledgers were found blank, as though history itself had been erased overnight. Yet beneath the fear, a strange reverence grew among the people. They began to call her the Mourning Mother, believing she carried the sorrow of those who had died unjustly. She funded hospitals for plague victims, walked among the sick without guards, and refused any royal escort. These actions baffled her council. Some called it compassion, others madness. In private journals, she wrote that the kingdom was not cursed by God, but by conscience. "It is not the ghosts of the dead," she wrote, "but the weight of the living that drags us down." That line was later censored from public record. The royal physician, Dr. Leonid Khrushchev, observed her in these final months. His surviving notes describe sleepless nights, hallucinations, and a recurring dream. She stood before a crowd dressed in mourning, holding a decree written in blood. When asked about it, she told him, "It is my destiny to finish what I began." His report was sealed under royal order and lost after her death. As famine deepened across the countryside, the queen's reputation deteriorated. Protesters gathered outside the palace gates carrying portraits of the dead. They chanted her name not in devotion but in accusation, yet she never ordered them dispersed. "Let them speak," she said, "for silence is the crown of cowards." That winter, the palace guards discovered her kneeling in the chapel before dawn, surrounded by extinguished candles. In her hands, a single parchment, her own death sentence unsigned. She claimed it came to her in a dream, written by unseen hands. "When I sign it," she whispered, "Moscow will breathe again." The guards dismissed it as another episode of delusion. But one of them, Captain Ilian, later testified that when he tried to take the paper from her, his hands went numb with cold. Within a week, he resigned and left the city. Soon after, strange events multiplied. Bells rang at midnight without wind. Portraits fell from walls. The sound of weeping filled the royal crypt, though no one was inside. Superstition spread faster than reason. Some said the queen had opened a gate between the living and the dead. Others claimed her guilt had summoned divine punishment. Yet through it all, she remained calm, almost serene, as though she awaited something inevitable. In the final month before her death, she dismissed her council entirely, writing her last decree alone. That decree, historians believe, was the same document she would later read aloud, her own sentence of execution. By the spring of 1876, the city of Moscow had grown silent under a blanket of dread. The queen's carriages no longer moved through Red Square, and the palace bells, once symbols of royal triumph, were muted by her command. Rumors had replaced news. Every tavern whispered that the queen had gone mad, but madness in her eyes wasn't chaos. It was conviction. Her nights were filled with rituals, candle-lit prayers, and the steady scratching of her quill against parchment. Witnesses claimed she wrote dozens of letters addressed to the spirits beneath the stones, sealing each with black wax and burning them before dawn. When her loyal guard, Captain Ilian, was summoned back to the palace, he found her standing before the mirror, wearing the old coronation gown that no one had seen in decades. The silk had yellowed, the crown dulled, yet she looked like a figure painted out of history itself. "Do you believe a queen can confess to her crimes?" she asked him. He stayed silent, unsure if it was a question or a command. She smiled faintly and replied, "Then watch me do what no king has ever dared." That week she ordered the great hall to be draped in black and the throne covered with chains. The court chaplain refused, calling it blasphemy. She dismissed him, saying, "Even God must turn his face when guilt takes the crown." It was then she began her trial of self. No jury, no court, only her pen, and the silent portraits of rulers past. Servants reported hearing her voice echo through the night, arguing with unseen judges, presenting evidence only she could see. The royal scribe assigned to record her words resigned after 3 nights, claiming he heard multiple voices speaking through her. Yet her decrees continued to arrive at dawn, written in perfect order. Historians would later find fragments of those writings, confessions of her role in the execution of innocents, admissions of power abused in the name of order. "The crown," she wrote, "is not a gift of God but a debt to the dead." Her final sessions became performances of grief. She appeared before the palace court alone, wearing white lace gloves and holding her decree, the one she claimed was her execution order. The nobles begged her to destroy it. "Your Majesty, Russia cannot survive the loss of its queen," one pleaded. She responded, "Russia must learn to breathe without fear of her queen." The tension reached its peak when she dismissed the royal guard and declared that her life belonged to the people. For the first time, peasants were invited inside the palace gates, their bare feet stepping across marble floors meant for kings. She asked them, "If the hand that fed you also starved you, what justice would you demand?" No one answered, yet their silence was enough. That night she placed the royal seal upon the parchment and summoned the heralds. The message was clear. The queen had sentenced herself to death to be carried out publicly at sunrise. No one believed it would happen. They thought it a performance, another act of repentance meant to please her own ghosts. But the next morning, as the sun cracked the horizon, the execution stage was built beneath the Kremlin walls, by her own order and under her watchful gaze. The dawn that followed was colder than any in recent memory. Frost covered the cobblestones, and yet the square was filled with thousands, peasants, nobles, soldiers, all drawn by disbelief. The queen had decreed that her execution be open to all, so the truth may not rot behind walls. A wooden scaffold stood beneath the shadow of the Kremlin, draped in crimson fabric. Upon it rested a single chair carved from oak, the same chair used for royal coronations centuries before. It was her command that it serve now for her death. When she appeared, there was no crown upon her head, only a black veil. Her robes were plain, her hands ungloved, the signet ring removed. The silence that greeted her arrival felt heavier than any applause could. Some whispered prayers, others curses. Children clutched their mother's hands as she ascended the steps. Captain Ilyin stood nearby, pale and trembling, for he had been chosen to carry out the execution. He had begged to be relieved of duty, but her final command was absolute. Do not deny me the justice I have denied others. The priests refused to bless the ritual, so she spoke her own prayer, a quiet plea for mercy, not for her soul, but for her people's memory. Her words were said to carry across the square without wind. I was the flame that burned too bright, and the smoke that blinded the good. Let my death clear the air. From the balcony above, foreign ambassadors looked on, stunned by the spectacle. Russia's queen was delivering her own punishment. It was beyond politics. It was mythology being written in real time. As the executioner prepared the blade, she turned to him and said, "History will call me cruel. Let it. But cruelty is sometimes the only language power understands." Those were her final words recorded by the royal scribe. But eyewitnesses claimed she added something else under her breath, something not written in any archive. Tell them I was already dead before this day. When the blade fell, the crowd did not cheer. Instead, a wave of soundless grief spread through the air, a collective gasp swallowed by frost. The bells of the Kremlin rang, though none had been ordered to strike. Captain Ilyin fell to his knees, dropping the sword and refusing to rise. It is said that at that moment a gust of warm wind passed through the square, melting a thin layer of frost where her blood touched the ground. For years afterward, no snow would settle on that patch of earth. By dusk, her body was sealed in a glass casket and placed in the palace chapel. The decree of execution was laid beside her, signed in her hand and stamped with her seal. But one witness, Dr. Khrushchev, swore that the ink on the parchment was not black, but dark red, as if written in blood. The council quickly erased all traces of the event, rewriting records to claim the queen had died of illness. Yet rumors persisted. The peasants spoke of her ghost walking through the corridors at midnight, whispering apologies to unseen souls. And though the empire tried to bury her name, songs were still sung in secret, songs that called her not a tyrant, but a martyr. For in death she had done what no ruler dared. She had judged herself, and in doing so freed her people from fear, if only for a moment. The weeks that followed her death were unlike anything Moscow had ever known. The city felt hollow, stripped of sound, as if even the air mourned. The royal banners were lowered, yet no one dared to remove the crimson scaffold. It stood there frozen in silence, a monument to guilt. Those who had attended the execution refused to speak of it again. Some fell ill. Others vanished entirely. The captain who swung the blade was found hanging in his quarters 10 days later, his body marked with frost, though the room was warm. His final note read only, "She forgave me in the end." The palace servants swore they heard footsteps at night, barefoot steps echoing through the marble halls. The queen's private chamber was sealed, but every midnight the scent of burnt wax filled the corridor. Inside, the air never grew stale. It was as if someone still breathed there. The priest who denied her last rites was struck by fever and confessed on his deathbed that he'd seen her shadow kneeling beside his bed, whispering prayers he could not understand. Historians dismissed these tales, calling them hysteria born of guilt. Yet one thing could not be denied. Every portrait of the queen began to fade. Her eyes, once painted with meticulous color, dulled over time. In the great gallery, one canvas cracked completely down the center, splitting her face in two. The archivists attempted to repair it, but each restoration failed. The line returned deeper than before. The people began to believe her spirit rejected remembrance, that she sought erasure, not glory. When her casket was moved to the royal crypt, workers complained of whispers. One faint voice repeating the same word again and again, condemned. Then, one evening, a soldier assigned to guard her tomb fled in terror, claiming he saw the queen standing inside the glass coffin, eyes open, smiling faintly. They replaced him the next day, but his replacement fled too, leaving behind his rifle and a note. "She's awake." Panic spread through the lower city. Churches filled with worshippers demanding exorcisms. Merchants refused to pass near the chapel after dusk. Those who did spoke of faint music, lullabies echoing from underground. By the first anniversary of her death, the legend of the tragic queen had taken root. No one could agree whether she was a cursed ruler or a saint seeking forgiveness. But all agreed on one thing: Moscow had changed. The fog never fully lifted. The bells rang on their own at random hours, and sometimes the snow fell blood red before turning white again. Scholars later tried to explain it as rust in the air, but the peasants knew better. They said it was her tears frozen and falling from heaven. Even the Tsar himself avoided mentioning her name, fearing the curse that had consumed his sister-in-law might spread through his bloodline. For the first time in Russian history, a royal's tomb was sealed with both Holy Scripture and iron locks, yet still the air around it pulsed, alive, restless. Witnesses swore the ground above her grave never froze, even in the harshest winter. Something beneath kept it warm, like a heartbeat waiting to rise again. The second winter after her execution brought the true horror. It began when a nobleman named Sergei Antonov purchased a mirror from the palace auction, a mirror once kept in the queen's chamber. Within days, he reported hearing her voice. At first it was faint, like wind through glass. Then it grew clearer, speaking his name, asking, "Do you believe in mercy?" He smashed the mirror, but shards were found glowing faintly in the dark. The priest who came to bless his home died the next morning, his skin pale, his veins traced with a thin red frost. Word spread quickly. The queen's curse had escaped the palace. Villagers said anyone who had touched her belongings became haunted. One scholar who studied her personal journals vanished, leaving behind only a single page filled with the word forgive written 117 times. The government declared all royal relics cursed and ordered their destruction, but each attempt failed. Fires went out on their own, and water froze mid-air before touching them. That year, the royal archives burned mysteriously, though no flame was ever seen. Witnesses said the smoke formed the shape of a woman before vanishing into the night sky. Inside the ashes, only one document survived: her signed order of execution. The ink was still wet. Panic consumed the capital. Families abandoned their estates, believing the queen's ghost walked among them. Even priests refused to perform midnight mass, claiming to hear whispers from the altar. The church finally intervened, declaring an official exorcism over Moscow. Bells rang for 12 hours straight, but by dawn every clapper had shattered. No sound remained. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence said to carry her voice beneath it like an echo hidden in breath. In desperation, the Tsar commanded her tomb to be exhumed and burned, believing fire would end the haunting. Yet when the iron locks were broken, the casket was empty. Only a faint outline remained where her body once lay, perfectly shaped as if she had dissolved into air. The guards swore they saw footprints leading out of the chapel, pressed lightly in the dust fading toward the door. That night a thick fog swallowed Moscow. The moon vanished, and even the Kremlin torches dimmed. People locked themselves indoors, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Those who dared to look outside claimed to see her, draped in black, face hidden, walking barefoot through the snow. Wherever she stepped, frost melted, revealing blood beneath. The sightings continued for 40 nights. Then, without warning, they stopped. The fog lifted. The air turned still, but something had changed. Those who had seen her could no longer dream. They described sleep as a door locked from the outside. The curse did not kill them, it silenced them. Over time, Moscow grew accustomed to this quiet dread, pretending to forget. The scaffold was finally taken down, melted into coins for the poor. Yet every spring the same rumor returned, that a woman in black walked through the red square before dawn, pausing where her blood once fell. The snow would melt in a perfect circle untouched by cold. Historians would later dismiss it all as myth. But when scientists examined her death records in 1912, one strange note appeared in the margins, written by an anonymous archivist. The queen who ordered her own death still rules the silence of this city. Years passed, but her shadow never truly faded. The empire moved on. New rulers, new wars, new prayers, but the name Ekaterina Vasilyevna was never spoken aloud. It lingered like a ghost in documents, replaced by titles. The condemned queen, the cursed widow, the vanished monarch. Scholars tried to erase her story from the royal archives, but the ink always returned by dawn, as if her memory refused burial. Peasants still lit candles at crossroads, whispering her name for protection. To them, she was no longer a villain, but a warning, a spirit caught between repentance and rebellion. In the villages near Moscow, strange things began to happen. Children born during storms were said to have eyes the same color as hers, gray with flecks of silver. Farmers who worked the land where her blood had fallen claimed their crops grew faster but carried a faint metallic scent. A generation grew up fearing her and loving her in equal measure. Songs about her circulated quietly through taverns, sung in low voices. She burned her crown to light our way, the lyrics said. The government banned these ballads, but each attempt to silence them only made them spread further. By the early 1880s, rumors of a secret cult devoted to her had surfaced. They called themselves the Order of the Black Veil. Their symbol, a circle of thorns surrounding an empty chair, mirrored the throne she had abandoned. Members believed she was not dead but transformed, existing in a realm between life and punishment. They gathered at midnight, performing rituals said to mirror her last prayer. Reports claimed some followers vanished after those ceremonies, their rooms filled with the scent of burnt wax. The police raided suspected gatherings, but each time the witnesses spoke of the same phenomenon, whispers echoing from nowhere and a cold mist that moved against the wind. One officer, Inspector Pavel Morozov, documented his experience in a private journal. "We found no bodies, no leader, only a voice saying, 'Mercy has many faces.'" His report was confiscated, and he was declared insane months later. But the most chilling discovery came from the Royal Chapel. In 1886, during renovation, workers uncovered faint writing carved into the marble behind her empty tomb. "I forgave them before they forgave me." No one could explain how it appeared. The stone had been sealed since her burial. Scientists examined the markings, confirming they were centuries older than the chapel itself. Though her death had occurred just a decade earlier, it defied every explanation. The church called it heresy. The historians called it impossible. But to the people, it was proof that the queen's soul still lingered, neither condemned nor free. Her story began to seep into foreign lands, translated into French, then German, then English. She became legend, Russia's bleeding ghost, the queen who executed herself to escape her sins. Plays were written about her, but each performance ended strangely. Actors fainted, lights flickered, and in one case the stage curtains caught fire, though no lamp was near. Every retelling carried a price, as if her memory resisted imitation. The empire wanted her forgotten, but memory, like frost, always returns, and in the quiet corners of Moscow, when fog drifts low and bells ring without hands, people still look over their shoulders, just in case she's standing behind them, waiting for the apology she never received. By the 1890s, the legend of the tragic queen had evolved into a national obsession. Newspapers occasionally printed forbidden accounts only to retract them days later, as if someone higher demanded silence. The government publicly denied her existence, but the more they denied, the stronger the myth became. A historian named Yuri Kolchak dared to publish a study titled "The Self-Execution of Royalty." He described her act not as madness but divine awareness, a final rebellion against cruelty itself. 3 days after the book's release, Kolchak's home burned to the ground. His manuscript survived untouched, found resting in the snow, its pages warm to the touch. Authorities called it coincidence, but no one believed that. People whispered that the queen protected anyone who told her story truthfully and punished those who lied. That same year, a painting appeared mysteriously in a museum gallery in St. Petersburg. It depicted the queen kneeling beside her own casket, holding a candle that never melted. Experts could not trace the artist, the brushwork, or even the paint origin. The pigment glowed faintly under candlelight, silver gray, the same shade as her eyes. The curator who first displayed it disappeared one night, leaving only a note. She asked me to finish the story. Priests began to fear that her soul had become something greater than a ghost, something cursed yet eternal. Some called it punishment. Others called it power. Even the royal descendants distanced themselves from the past, refusing to use her name. But deep within the archives, locked behind coded seals, her personal writings remained. In 1895, an archivist named Svetkov claimed to have read her final letter, a confession written hours before her death. He described it as a prayer written in blood not for herself, but for those she condemned. Days later, he was found unconscious, muttering the same words over and over. The blood remembers. What that meant was never explained. Soon after, reports emerged from the outskirts of Moscow, people dreaming of her. They saw her standing beside a frozen river, whispering, "You will know peace when truth kneels." These dreams spread across cities, described by hundreds who had never met each other. Scientists labeled it mass hysteria. The church called it possession. But for many it was comfort, the idea that she was watching, still trying to guide her people from beyond death. Decades later, when the empire began to crumble under new revolutions, protesters carried black veils instead of flags. They chanted her words, "Mercy is the last rebellion." Her spirit, it seemed, had become the anthem of the condemned. Even as Moscow modernized, every new ruler ordered her name struck from records, yet each generation rediscovered her story. It was as if history itself refused to let her rest. In time, her curse transformed into legacy. The people no longer feared her, they revered her. She became a symbol of remorse and defiance, the queen who faced judgment not from God but from herself. On the centennial of her death, an anonymous benefactor restored her portrait to the Royal Museum. This time her eyes were bright again, the crack across her face sealed. Beneath it, a new plaque read, "The Queen Who Chose the Blade." Visitors claim that when they stand before it too long, they hear a faint heartbeat, soft but steady like forgiveness, still alive beneath centuries of frost. Even after a century, scientists and historians failed to explain the unnatural events surrounding her death. Theories emerged, twisted by fear and fascination alike. Some claimed Ekaterina had discovered a forbidden ritual from the monasteries of the Carpathians, an ancient order devoted to balancing sin with sacrifice. Others believed her self-execution was not merely punishment, but an invocation, an attempt to transfer guilt from her people onto herself. When researchers re-examined her preserved documents in 1910, they found a page written in two distinct handwritings, one hers, the other identical but slanted backward, as if mirrored. Experts tested the ink and paper. Both were genuine, both written within the same hour. How could one person write in two different styles simultaneously? The mystery deepened when blood analysis of the parchment revealed an unknown compound resembling mercury fused with iron. It was neither natural nor replicable. A chemist called it poison steel in liquid form. Another strange occurrence emerged in the 1920s. A team restoring the old royal chapel heard faint humming under the floor. When they broke the marble tiles, they found a layer of frozen soil emitting low vibrations, as if something beneath was alive. Instruments detected a rhythmic pulse matching the human heartbeat. Terrified, the workers resealed it. The report vanished, but rumors spread like wildfire. In 1937, a Soviet archivist named Mikhail Gerasimov reopened the Queen's sealed case, determined to expose the myth as superstition. 3 days later, he was found dead in his office, surrounded by open files. Witnesses said the temperature in the room was below freezing, though no window was open. His final notation read, "The Queen's curse is not death, it's remembrance." Decades later, when digital scans of her portraits were made, technicians discovered a reflection inside her painted eyes, a figure standing behind the artist wearing the same dress she died in. Yet the painting had been completed months before her execution. The discovery reignited global fascination. Paranormal investigators claimed Moscow's energy field changed near the site of her death. Magnetic readings spiked, compasses spun. Even satellites captured a faint distortion pattern above the city each winter. forming the shape of a crown. Governments ignored it, but independent researchers published the findings in underground journals, calling it the Queen's Echo. In modern times, skeptics blamed optical illusions, but eyewitnesses continued to tell eerily consistent stories. Tourists visiting the museum reported chills that numbed their lips and fingers even in summer. Guards heard a soft voice near her restored portrait, gentle, remorseful, whispering, "I waited too long." Audio engineers tested the recordings and found no trace of human origin. The sound existed only between frequencies, a whisper that lived where silence begins. Psychologists argued it was collective guilt carried through generations, yet those who heard it described a strange peace afterward as if forgiven. And so her mystery endured, not as horror but as paradox. Was she a monster redeemed or a saint punished? No one could answer. What terrified scholars most was not her curse but her calm. Every trace of her story ended the same way, with acceptance. As one historian wrote, Ekaterina Vasilievna did not haunt Moscow. She became it. By the mid-20th century, the legend surrounding Queen Ekaterina had spread beyond Russia. Investigators visiting Moscow reported the same anomalies: sudden drops in temperature, whispers in empty corridors, and reflections of a woman in black appearing in mirrors where no one stood. One prominent case occurred in 1952, when a foreign diplomat toured the restored palace. Alone in the hall where she had signed her execution decree, he recorded a sudden spike in magnetic readings. The compass on his watch spun wildly. Moments later, he claimed to see a faint figure kneeling before an invisible audience, hands clasped as if in prayer. When he attempted to approach, the figure vanished, leaving only a chill that penetrated his clothing. Word spread quietly among scholars that her presence was not bound by the physical world. It existed between perception and memory. By 1970, parapsychologists used early infrared cameras in the Kremlin. They observed inexplicable shadows moving along corridors where no one walked. The shadows paused at certain doorways, then disappeared. Attempts to reproduce the effect failed. No wind, no drafts, no hidden passageways were detected. In private interviews, surviving servants' descendants reported recurring dreams of the queen. She stood in her crownless robes, hands extended, murmuring instructions, sometimes naming individuals who would later encounter inexplicable accidents. In the late 1980s, digital audio technicians captured frequencies near her former bedroom. When slowed to human hearing, the recordings produced whispers calling names of people unknown to the recordists, punctuated by a faint heartbeat. The patterns could not be explained by natural phenomena. Researchers speculated it was a residual imprint of her final act of will, her consciousness imprinted upon the palace itself. Even modern historians admitted anomalies persisted. Photographs taken inside the palace sometimes showed an indistinct figure in black, always near windows where light should not fall. Scientific journals dismissed it as lens flare or double exposure, yet witnesses remained consistent. The figure's posture, her hands folded, her eyes fixed forward. Locals continued to whisper her legend, calling her the eternal judge. Some claimed she appeared during disasters, her image warning citizens of danger, though always silent. Skeptics remained unconvinced, attributing it to folklore and hysteria. Yet hundreds of independent accounts over decades painted a pattern no single explanation could satisfy. The Queen's life, death, and posthumous presence created an enigma of law, morality, and the supernatural. Even today, tourists avoid her former chamber at night. Those who linger describe a pressing weight in the air, a sound like the scratching of a quill and the faint scent of burnt wax. Scientists, clergy, and historians alike acknowledge the paradox. She is gone yet present, condemned yet forgiven, dead yet alive in perception. Moscow itself carries her imprint: the foggy streets, the sudden chills, the shadows at windows. Every winter, stories resurface. Children vanish briefly only to reappear telling tales of a lady in black. Travelers swear to hear whispers in empty halls, and the city seems to breathe differently when snow falls where her blood touched. Queen Ekaterina Vasilievna, who ordered her own execution, remains a mystery unsolved. Her story defies both history and science, leaving Moscow with a question that persists across centuries. Did she die to save her people, or did she live to haunt them forever? Time moves relentlessly, yet the shadow of Queen Ekaterina endures. Her story, though centuries old, reverberates through Moscow's streets. whispered in alleys, reflected in icy river surfaces, and carried on the wind through the Kremlin gates. Her crown, her throne, and even her casket are gone, yet her presence is palpable, felt by those sensitive to the unseen. Scholars argue about the meaning of her self-execution, historians debate the authenticity of legends, and the city itself seems to conspire in preserving her memory. Artists, haunted by her image, attempt to capture her on canvas but fail. Her essence refuses replication, dissolving into shadows and whispers before the final stroke can be made. Writers who chronicle her deeds often report dreams in which she appears, kneeling, calm, waiting, silently judging. Every historical record, every anecdote, every artifact bears the imprint of both her guilt and her mercy. The paradox of her life: power entwined with remorse, cruelty entwined with repentance, creates a narrative impossible to forget. Children learn the tales in secret. Mothers whisper cautionary prayers about ambition and conscience, and travelers report chills in her former rooms, feeling unseen eyes upon them. Even modern technology fails to contain her. Infrared cameras, magnetic detectors, and audio sensors repeatedly capture anomalies within her former palace. Shadows without form, sounds without origin, subtle warmth in frozen hallways. These occurrences remain unexplained, a constant reminder that her final act was more than an execution. It was a transformation. Ekaterina Vasilievna's death did not end her influence. It altered it. Moscow, once merely a city of cobblestones and towers, became a living monument to her choice. Every snowfall, every frozen mist, every strange echo is a reflection of her legacy. The historian's task is both impossible and necessary: to understand a queen who defied both law and nature. Those who have walked the palace at night swear that the air grows heavier near her former chambers, a weight of judgment and sorrow that cannot be lifted. Priests and mystics alike debate whether her spirit seeks absolution, or to remind the living of the fragility of conscience. Scholars attempting to separate myth from fact are confronted by artifacts that resist categorization. Letters with ink that changes hue depending on light, glass fragments that hum faintly when held, and floor tiles that remain warm despite freezing temperatures. The more one studies her, the more one realizes that she is not merely a historical figure but a living memory, a presence threaded through the city itself. To some, she is the embodiment of repentance. To others, she is a curse, and yet all agree the finality of death did not claim her. It only transformed her. Moscow breathes with her story embedded in its very stones, in the frost, in the shadows, in the wind. Even centuries later, tourists report sudden chills, whispers in empty corridors, and fleeting glimpses of a figure in black. It is as if the city itself remembers what history cannot erase. A queen who ruled through fear, repented through death, and endured through legend. Her tale is not a warning nor merely a tragedy. It is an echo. The echo of choice, power, and consequence resonating beyond the grave. The final reflection on Queen Ekaterina is both haunting and profound. Even today, centuries later, Moscow feels her presence in ways invisible to the eye but undeniable to the senses. Streets that once carried her footsteps seem to whisper her story to those who listen. The frosted windows of old palaces glint with memories of her reign, and shadows move differently in the places she once walked. Scholars and mystics debate endlessly whether her act was divine, cursed, or merely the ultimate statement of remorse. Yet all agree her life and death defied conventional understanding. Her execution, ordered by her own hand, set a precedent that no other ruler dared to emulate. It was a paradox of power: to rule, to condemn, and to absolve oneself before all witnesses. Visitors to the Royal Museum often report inexplicable sensations: sudden chills, faint murmurs, or the fleeting impression of someone standing just behind them. Audio recordings occasionally capture whispers, seemingly calling names that no one present could know. Infrared scans show movement in empty halls. Whether these are echoes of a haunted spirit or the imprint of extraordinary guilt remains unknown. Artists and writers continue to be captivated by her story. Every attempt to portray her visually results in blurred images or smudged lines. Paintings fade inexplicably. Words in biographies rearrange themselves overnight, and manuscripts are discovered altered in ways that defy logic. Moscow itself carries her memory. Fog gathers in patterns over streets she once traversed. Frost melts in strange circles where her blood was said to have fallen, and even in spring, pockets of air feel colder in her presence. The paradox is clear: death did not release her. It transformed her. Ekaterina Vasilyevna became an enduring reminder that power without conscience demands repayment, and that true judgment often begins with oneself. Her name, once whispered in fear, is now uttered with reverence, curiosity, and caution. Folklore, science, and history collide in her story, creating a legend impossible to ignore. She is the queen who ruled from beyond the grave, whose execution did not end her influence but amplified it. Across generations, she has remained both a warning and a guide, a figure of terror and awe. Her life teaches that remorse, when embraced fully, can transcend mortality. Even as centuries pass, children born in Moscow learn of the queen who judged herself, and artists, scholars, and mystics alike study the spaces she occupied. They hope to glimpse her truth, yet she always remains just beyond reach, a shadow and a presence intertwined. When winter descends and the snow settles over Red Square, some claim they see her figure in the distance. Tall, composed, black robes brushing the frost, her gaze calm yet piercing. In that sighting there is reflection, the price of power, the weight of choice, and the resonance of conscience. Ekaterina's story is never-ending, carried in whispers, paintings, and the very air of Moscow. She is gone, yet everywhere, condemned yet revered, tragic yet immortal. The city, the world, and history itself bear witness to her final act, the queen who executed herself, creating a legacy that no time, law, or man could erase. She exists still, in every shadow, every frost, every silence, reminding the living that the consequences of choice can echo long after the heartbeat stops.